this computer. Okay, so welcome back for those of you who were here last weekend. This is part 2 of preparation for assignment 5. Today we'll be covering the DOM again, and then also adding in fetching JSON files and working with forms. So I'm going to share my screen and make sure I'm on the right one. Yep. Okay. I'm going to get this off of here, out of the way. There you go. Okay. So I have prepped some code, and here's the basic premise of this thing. I was looking at public APIs just to see like what would be interesting to go out there and consume. And I found this one, an open trivia database, which is cool. It's got tons of questions in tons of different categories. And it's very easy to access. It doesn't require an authorization key, and it doesn't have any sort of CORS policy issues, which don't even worry about what that is. I just promise you it's a pain, because sometimes convincing the internet to give you the information can sometimes be hard. And they do it on purpose to have for security purposes. But this person was smart, given the nature of the data, and just made it completely easy to access. So it's perfect for this sort of example. So I went in and I looked around and trying to see if I can find, oh, there we go, API, okay. Yeah, so they give you a little information about this API. They tell you that there's categories are the number of questions, the category of the questions themselves, the difficulty, easy, medium, or hard, multiple choice or true, false, and you can actually choose which kind of encoding. And they explain that a little bit here in the documentation, where they talk about how for coding, it helps with something when you're working with text that has a lot of complicated punctuation or characters, if it's actually encoded when it's sent through the JSON, so that when you go to use it, it'll still translate the way that you need it to. For our purposes, default works because we're going straight to HTML. We just want to display it on our page. So I chose to just stick with the default for that. But they also have this thing here that I decided to take advantage of, where they offer session tokens, which basically what that means is the browser says, okay, you've started a session. You know, you went to this website, you went to this page, you have a session, here's your token if you request it. And for 6 hours, actually, no, it says after 6 hours of inactivity. So as long as you're active or not inactive for more than 6 hours, it remembers what questions you have already received. So it actually prevents you from getting questions duplicated, which is a pretty cool feature. It was a very thoughtful thing for the person who created this to have done. So they basically tell you, you know, if you want to access this API, you have a basic URL that you're going to go to. And then after that, you'll have your query parameters. And the most basic is the amount. They default to 10. And then after that, you would add additional things. So they actually give you a way to test that out down here. So like, let's say we wanted to do video games and make sure they're easy questions and specifically multiple choice, and we'll generate a URL. So up here, they give us this URL. And if we actually put this into the browser and go look and see, there's the 10 questions that come back. And I know this looks kind of scary, so I'm going to copy this and we'll go over to VS Code for a second. And just temporarily, I'm going to open a new file here and we call it test.json, okay? And I'm going to put it in here and then right click on it and say format selection. And look at that, we have beautiful JSON. So you can see that when it comes back, the actual JSON itself has, it's a single object that has 2 keys. One is the response code, and as near as I can tell, having worked with the data from this API, that 0 just means, yes, it was a successful response. I've got some information for you. And then the second key is the important one, that's the results. So what we want to do is access those results, and then we want to be able to work with the information inside each of those question objects. You can see that's one question right there. And the question has its category, it's got the type, the difficulty, the actual question itself, the correct answer, and then the 3 incorrect answers for multiple choice. And they've made it easy to also that they always have exactly 4 possible answers if it's multiple choice. So that makes it kind of, easy and clean for formatting. And then obviously true and false questions just have 2, true and false. So, getting a sense of what your data is expected to, like what types of information you have access to and how you can expect to work with it, it's really a good idea to kind of go and get a sense of that first. And for your assignment, they'll show you exactly kind of what they want it to look like. And so you'll be able to see that right away. For me, building this from scratch and just coming up with it, I had to go and look and see what kind of information do I have available to me and what are the names of each of those keys, because I'm going to need to be able to access them, right? So that was kind of where I started with that. So I'm going to, actually, I have already created some reference files here. So like they have a way for you to go and just return all the categories, and you can have the ID, which is what it needs in order to bring back. You have to send it the ID, not the name, for query parameter if you want to actually get questions from just one category. So they provide this easily so that you can see what's currently in the system that's possible, all the possible categories. And these were sample questions, kind of the same thing I just did. And then they also have this feature that I have not done anything with yet, but it would be cool to, that tells you how many questions there are of all the different categories in total. And right now they're working off of those 4,000 verified questions right there. That's the bank we'll be working off of. So I've got those up here just for reference, and but these are the main files that we want to be working with. Let's go back to here just for a second so that I can show you what the basic page looks like, okay? So I have just, put some very basic CSS and HTML together to give a very simple layout. We've got our header up here. It's got the title and this little byline that, has a link to the Open Trivia database to give credit back to that. And then this bar here that is our form, essentially. It's just a real simple inline form that gives us a way to say how many questions, what category, and you'll notice this is empty, right? There's a reason for that. And the type and the difficulty, which I have pre-coded because those are not going to change. They're always going to be exactly that. And then there's this big empty space down here, and that's because that's where the questions are supposed to go, questions and answers. And we have to come up with all that. Right now, if I hit go, nothing happens, right? It just it keeps refreshing the page because it's trying to send the form somewhere. So we're going to do something about that as well. All right. I'm going to close that, keep tabs simple. All right. Let's just take a look here so you can see the HTML that's making up this behind the scenes. Excuse me, I gotta get some water. All right, so we got our header, very straightforward, page title, byline, got the link to the site. I've got some IDs in here that give me very specific, these are really only necessary. They're not necessary for the DOM, those are necessary for CSS because I want to style them in a very specific way. You'll find when you're working in the DOM that you are constantly having to pay attention to that. Like if I give something an ID because it's the only thing I want to do, I need to identify that way. Am I doing it because I need to style it, or am I doing it because I need it for the DOM to, make an object related to it? Or do I need it for both? So I was kind of having to keep track of that and make sure that I had everything straight. So yeah, I've got this form. I've got a basic, I set this up, this container row. I put all the contents of the form in a container so that I could keep it in line, because I use Flexbox, which basically just means that I could tell it to put each of the divs inside like in order and to make them go side by side instead of going in a column. So that's all that means right there. And you can see that in the CSS. So each of these holds a different input and it's got the label and the input for that. So this one's of type number, which is why you get the little, you know, tick where you can go up and down. Okay. I gave it ID and a name. The next one is the category request. Now I've put the first option being any. I've done that actually, you can see for all three of these, so that it starts with being blank. That's why when you look at it, there's nothing there, but then when you click on it, you see the options below. By the way, radio buttons and drop downs, you don't need to do any of this for assignment 5. Your HTML is actually very straightforward. But for the purposes of doing what I'm doing, I needed them. So, you know, bonus features, you guys are getting to see all this. Okay, so here, this one, since it's not as straightforward as just having multiple choice true or false, or having, you know, easy, medium, or hard down here, we want to actually think ahead about the fact that what if down the road, this API actually introduced a couple of new categories? Our site would need to be able to handle that. And that's one of the reasons that they have that specific request you can do where you can go and get just the categories and their ID numbers, is to give you a way to have an array of those to work off of automatically. And that way you can populate this dynamically when the page loads and have exactly what categories are actually available at that moment from whatever questions are in their system. So we're gonna look at how to do that. And then down here, the rest of the page is this big empty space, and that is gonna be all DOM, 100% created by the DOM. And it's gonna be pretty cool watching it all unfold. So CSS, pretty straightforward. I've got my, you know, regular body, header, main, footer, section, div, p, and button stuff. And then specific elements, I have lots of IDs on that page, but only a few that I actually needed for styling. So those are here. And then same thing for the classes. And you'll see how these are used as we get more into some of the code in the JavaScript. So I don't need that anymore. All right, time for the JavaScript. This is where it gets real. Okay, so we've got, I've got some notes here. I kind of already walked you through it, kind of what the API, you know, information was. Something that I don't think I said, but it was there, is that it can only accept a max of 50 questions. So one of the things that you're going to have to do for assignment 5 is to validate some of the form entry. This is going to give us a chance to do that for this example. We're going to validate to make sure that they don't either leave that blank or make it negative or go beyond 50. We'll have a way to catch that, so that if you hit the submit button, it will not go any further if that information is not the way that it needs to be. Okay, so I mentioned that token. Before we even get down here to, you know, the window loading and all the stuff we need to do for the page to function, I went ahead and created these ahead of time that you pretty much don't need to mess with other than calling a specific function right here, because this is the kind of stuff that really is just about the behind the scenes that, you know, gets the page ready to run. And is definitely way outside the scope of what you need to do. But I'll tell you about it so that you understand the big picture. The token, I set a variable up here for that because we really only want the token to be, for it to go get the token once. And then the rest of the time that the person's on the page, we're going to use that prevent default method that you guys may have read about in the material. That's going to keep the page from refreshing whenever we hit that submit button, so that we'll keep the same token every single time and not have to go get a new one. And that's going to allow us to take advantage of its capability of not giving us duplicate questions if we, you know, keep pulling in more and more questions. So you could say you want to do, you know, 150 questions from a specific category, And because it only returns 50 at a time, then you'll just have to submit 3 times, but it'll give you different questions, hold a complete new set, as long as that token's in place. So we got that. And we're using a very simple fetch for this. For the sake of consistency, I have kept the generic variables the same. We always use response for the initial request, and then JSON for the second part, the second then, that will actually get the data itself and let us do what we need to do with it before sending it back. Okay, or yeah, before back, forth, we've discussed this. Okay, so I think I discussed this, and some of you were there on Wednesday in my group for Studio, that we were talking about the concept of fetch and promises. So I'm going to talk about it the same way that I talked about it then, which is basically think about it like Postmates. Okay, you use the Postmates app on your phone, for example, to order some food from a restaurant. Postmates says, okay, got your order, hold up, we'll be right back. And then they go and they find a actual Postmate, a person who's going to go pick it up and deliver it. And then that person goes and takes care of, getting the food, picking it up and bringing it back. So while I'm sitting here waiting for all of the, the food, I can, look on my app and say, hey, what's going on? Postmates can only give me so much information because they can't tell exactly what the driver's doing. So you can kind of think of this being, the 2 thens are kind of representing that, right? You've got the initial request, and then you've got the second request inside that that's going to for the particulars. So that's our Postmates driver going to get the food. Once they have it and they've got all those details and it's exactly the way it's supposed to be, they will head toward my house, and then they'll notify Postmates that they're doing so, and Postmates can tell me, yes, they're on their way. So promises are, kind of thing where you send the command and you wait for everything to come back, but you can't guarantee how long it's going to take. So I'm going to go run errands or, go down to the basement and do some laundry. I don't know exactly when that food's going to show up on my front porch. All I know is that I can't eat until it gets here. So, I can do other things in the meantime. I just need to make sure I don't try to eat until the food's actually here. And that's where the analogy breaks down just a little bit. But we'll see how that works actually very clearly in a second. So the second thing is fetching the categories. We are going to go and use that special URL that they gave us for getting that list of categories with their IDs and names back. And I've set up an array to hold those, to store it just for us. And so it's going to go and actually pull, it's going to take the object, the JSON object that's received back, and then trivia categories was the property of it that we needed to access. That's the array of all the objects. So we go and we get that and put that in, and then we have all the objects. And just to remember, yeah, so trivia categories, that's a thing. That's the array right there, and it's got all the objects. So we have that now. We've got it stored in our own array in our program, and we will be able to make use of it. So this is going to go get it, and then we're going to actually call a function that's going to, and we haven't written it yet, but it's going to list the categories in that drop down for us. And so we're going to call it here because we need to make sure that everything's done in the right order. We cannot, actually populate that list until it's received back, and we don't know how long it's going to take. Same thing here, our function that holds all of our DOM code for the dynamic aspects of the page. We can't initiate this until we have that information, or everything will be out of order. And I can demonstrate that in a little bit. Right now, what I have for the load function is to fetch the token, fetch the category. So this calls both of these functions. And then a little console log that says page loaded. Is it really though? Because if we look at the console in the browser, and you see this page loaded, you'll notice that it actually came first, right? So it says page loaded, and then it says categories loaded and categories displayed. And of course, that's not true because we don't have it there yet, but it will. And then the token, everything is completely in the opposite order, right, of what I actually said to do in this function right here. That's how promises work. You never know. And I could sit here and I can refresh this page, and now we get the token first, and then the categories came second. So that's the thing about promises. You know, you go and you request this information from somewhere, but you have absolutely no idea how long it's going to take. So we have that in place, and we will test it out in a second when we have some of these functions where we can actually see the data coming back and then put it on the page. So first up, we've got a bunch of to-dos here. I may have mentioned this in the past, but for VS Code, there are a few actually options for getting plugins that allow you to do these fancy highlighting. Whenever you do to-do, there's also Fix Me. I like that one, bright pink. So like when I'm coding, I'll put lots of to-dos and Fix Me's in because it gives me a chance to retain my train of thought. Like I'll think of something and go, oh, that would be cool. Or, oh, shoot, I need to fix that. And I'll make a note, and then I can keep thinking and working on what I was doing right at the moment instead of getting distracted, because it happens all the time. So yeah, you can go Google that, and then it's really actually just kind of like it opens it up in here, and then you say, yes, use me, and then it's boom, it's done. So it's real easy. So first thing, establish a variable to hold the questions after they are returned from the fetch request. That's easy. It just needs to be an array, right? Because we just want to hold those question objects. So we're just going to go with let questions equal, and we actually don't need to initialize it based on the way we're going to do it, because we're not going to push anything to it. We're just going to replace it, but we'll do that anyway so that it's a reminder that that's what it represents, is an array of objects. So that's done. Boom. All right, one to do down. Next, we need to establish variables for the objects, and we may do this in bits and pieces, but initially, I mean, sorry, that's not the word I was looking for. Generally speaking, I like to put them all at top, so I've got it all up here. So the first thing I can think of, you know, we've got all these form pieces that we're going to be working with, right? So we should probably have some objects for those. So let's say that we want the number of questions to equal, and we're going to go to the document. We're going to say get element by ID, and we'll go to known questions. And I only know what that is because I've been working on this, but to know what you're going and getting, you just go and look for it in your HTML file. You can see right here, I got the input, and that ID right there is known questions. So that's what I'm connecting to. So now I have an object over in my JavaScript file that this represents that element. So now we can work with it. That's the nature of the DOM, the document object model. So back over here, next up is category. These are pretty straightforward. Category, type, and difficulty. They're named what they are. I kept it simple. So we can do those real quick. So let category equal document, element by ID, and category. And then let, what did I say? Type. There we go. Okay, type. And then let, holy schmoly, my brain, difficulty. I'm having difficulty remembering difficulty. How appropriate. Okay. Oops. Okay. So now we've got those 4 things represented. We also may need our submit button. There's a couple of different ways to handle that. You can either connect to that submit button itself as its own element, or because this is set up as a form, you can actually just do a form level listener. So I think what we're going to do is go that route. We'll just do the form. So let's do that. Again, keep it simple. document get ID form. All right. And I'm going to, sorry guys, I'm gonna set my self away up here on Slack because it's blowing up. All right. All right, so we've got basic pieces of our page represented now in the DOM, and we can work with them. So let's see, is there anything else? Yeah, I think the last thing we'll want to do is that question area down at the bottom, because that's a pretty important one. You remember when we were over here looking at this and there's nothing there, I said it's because it's 100% done in the DOM, right? So that this section right here, we're going to fill this with a bunch of HTML, but we're going to do it by building it over in the JavaScript file. So we need to connect to this so that we can send it a ton of inner HTML to fill that whole thing up. And that is very relevant for your assignment. So let's go back to here. And same thing, document, get on my ID, and then question area. Okay. Okay. I think we have pretty much everything we need to work with right there for the most part. So we're going to write a function to populate this drop-down list. This is where it gets kind of fun doing this stuff. When you get in a couple of weeks, when you guys start learning about Angular, there's going to be some really cool things about Angular that allow you to do a lot of this stuff really easily too. So this is kind of the first time that I actually had investigated doing this type of thing with the DOM. And it's really, very similar and how easy it is if you go and get the data and you've got it and you can just kind of cycle through it, iterate through it, and make all of these different options that are needed for that select dropdown. So let's get started on that. We are going to have a function. We're going to call it list categories. And we'll do a basic loop. And in this case, we need to loop over what? I'm going to let you guys actually speak up. Based on what we've created so far, what am I going to be looping over?
The categories?
Categories, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We went and we fetched all these categories and we put them into that category array that we had established up here, right? So that's exactly right. So we want to go and see what is the length of the categories right now that they have in their database. And that is how many times we'll loop through this. Okay. Basically, all we need to do, right, is establish some HTML to throw into this this category right here. And if we go over and we look, sorry, hang on, guys. I put myself as away and I'm still getting blown up. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Yes. So over here, if we go to the category section, we've got the select element, which is actually the entire dropdown, right? And inside each of those options are option tags. So that's what we need to add more of. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go and grab our object that connects to this element, the select element, and say that we want to add to its inner HTML. Basically, anything between these two tags is the inner HTML of the select element. So we can create additional HTML to get thrown in between it. That's what we're going to do. So we're going to say category inner HTML. So we're referring right here to this object. And And we're just going to add to it because we already had a little bit of content there. Or even if we didn't, if it was, you know, if there's nothing there, it knows it's an empty string. So we'll add a little bit to it. And we are going to make this a template literal because we need to be able to use the template literal variables, the placeholders. So option. And we're going to say that the value of the option is equal to, and this is where it gets fun. We're going to call, we're going to go to the categories. We're going to go to the specific category object that we're looking at right now in the categories array. And then we're going to get the ID. We want that specific ID to be the value because that is what gets sent as a query parameter to the API when we tell it which category we want. Is actually the ID and not the name. So we have that, and then what we actually want to display on the page, what goes between the option tags, is going to be the name. So categories at index I dot name, and then we'll close out that option. And I'm not sure why it didn't automatically. Oh, it's because I'm writing HTML in a JS file. Never mind. I forget that it doesn't like self-complete when you're writing it in this file. Okay, so that's it. I have, you know, a tag that I'm adding so that for every single category that's in that array that we went and fetched, it's going to now create an option for that drop-down list where the value is the ID, but it displays the name. Is that clear? Everybody follow that? Okay. And this is all gravy, by the way. You don't have to do this for your assignment. This is gravy, but let's test it out. Let's see what happens. Oh, you know why it's not here? Does anybody know why? I put a note up here that we needed to call the function, but we haven't actually called it. So let's do that. And it doesn't have any parameters. It's just basically saying, hey, go do that. So we've got this function and we want to do it. So now let's try again. Uncaught list categories is not defined. Is so. Oh, you know what? It's because it's outside the scope, right? I forgot about that when I moved this. I didn't have this here before. Okay. You know what I'm going to do? Let's see. How do I want to handle that? Let's handle it by moving this out. Can we do that? No, because we have to have the category, which means it's got to be in the scope of here. Okay. So instead of putting it in here, we're going to put it in here and just have it run as it's running through the init function. And the way that we can not worry about that is the fact that we're also calling init once we are absolutely sure that those categories have been fetched. So this isn't even going to happen until we've got those categories back and stored in our categories array. So we can have it, we can just do it down here and it'll be fine. So let's try that. There we go. And look at this. Did you see that? How about that? Every single one of the categories that came back from their API is now in here, and each one of them behind the scenes has the ID number as its value. And that's going to be very useful for us in a second. Okay, so another one down. Boom. And I'm going to just put a note here. Call function to populate category dropdown form. Okay. We're going to write a function to build the URL with the query parameters. Okay, so you guys have learned about query parameters as you were learning about forms, and you created your very own search engine. Remember that for Studio? So this is going to be a little bit like that, only with a couple of extra parameters. So we have start a function. We'll call it build URL. And we need to start off with the initial part of the URL. And we know from having looked at the API information that that is, do I have it here? Oh, funny, I didn't actually, it's okay. Didn't actually put it here, but if you go to the documentation, they tell you, you can see it right there that it's actually this first part right here. That's what we want, is to call the API itself. So we're going to put that in as the first part of our string here that we're building. And let's see, because we're using a token, I'm also going to go ahead and put that in. So I'm going to start off with the very first parameter being the token parameter. And we'll stop the string there because we need to add a variable. And we're going to call it our current token. And then we're going to pick back up with the string. And we're going to add another parameter. And that's going to be amount. So, we'll say and amount equals. And then we add. Now, what am I going to add here? Somebody know? Where am I going to go get that number from? How do I tell it where to find that number?
In the token, in the very first, we declared it, right?
Well, I've got the token already. So now I'm sorry. So amount refers to the number of questions that we're asking for.
Oh, okay.
So num questions.
Yes,
But the number.
Right. So how do I reference that?
Dot value.
Dot value. Exactly. Yeah. Most input elements, and there are so many different kinds, but most of them, if you just want to know what the user has put in, that's how you get to it, is dot value. So that's exactly right. And then we're just going to do that again. But the problem with this is that some of these things are actually optional, aren't they? I don't think that I covered it explicitly, but let me explain it now. Basically, what they say here is that you can choose like one of these, or you can choose none of them. And if you choose none of them, it'll just kind of give you a mix. So if you want any category, then you need to not put anything onto your, no query parameter for that. So if I was to take this part off, the category equals 15, and just come back here. Oh, I can't edit this because it's not, yeah. Anyway, if I was to remove that, then all it would do is go get 10 questions of difficulty easy and type multiple choice, but they would be from whatever random categories. Okay, so we actually are giving our users that choice, that they can leave this blank and just do whatever. So if that's the case, then what we're going to need to do, and this one, the number of questions is required, so we're going to leave that here. But let's just leave that as the end of our starting point for the URL. And now let's do some conditionals, because we really only want to add the rest if it isn't any. Any is very specifically the value that I gave those blank options, okay? So that's what I'm comparing it against. If it's blank up here, it has the value any, because that's the way that I coded it over here, okay? That's what I'm referring to. So yeah, so we're basically saying if it's not, strictly equal to any, then we will take new URL and add a little bit more. So we're going to say and category equals, and then just like before, we'll do category.value. And essentially, we're going to do the same thing for type and for difficulty. So I can just change those out, right? I can spell it. Okay. And that way, it'll only add these if there is actually a value for it, a specific value for it. Otherwise, it just skips it and goes and checks the next one. And so by the end, you'll have a URL that's built only of the query parameters that are the user's actually asking for. All right. I believe that just like if you send, the API is set up so that just like if you send any of these without a parameter and it just brings back a mix, if you don't send a value, it'll actually default to 10. But for the purposes of this exercise, we need to practice a little bit of validation, right? So I'm basically going to require that you have to have a value of some kind. We're not going to let it just go back to their fallback of 10. So we're just going to leave that just like it is. This has to be there. So you got that one done. And we can't exactly test it. Well, I mean, yeah, we could. Let's keep going though, and we'll see how it all comes together. Okay, here's the important thing. We need a function to fetch these questions, right? It doesn't do us any good to have somebody come in and tell us what they want if we can't provide it for them. So we are going to start a new function and we'll call it get questions. And, oh, hey, I forgot something. Some of these functions don't require return statements because they're just doing something. This one, in fact, does require a return because we have to spit back out whatever the final result was of that new URL string because we're going to need it here to go get the questions. All right, so we're going to go get it from that function, and now we have the URL in this function to work with. And we need a fetch statement. And because fetch is complicated and it's really easy to mess up the syntax because it's you know, very dense, I'm going to copy and paste it from somewhere else and then change what needs to be changed. So here, we're actually going to fetch directly to that specific URL that we created, right? Because we want to make sure that it sends exactly the query parameters that the user is expecting. So that's why we went and we built it over here, and we are going to just pull it in as a variable. So we've got our response, we've got our JSON, and so now that we've got the JSON coming in, and obviously all of this is not applicable to, there we go, okay. We are going to establish the questions. We already have our questions array that we created up here, and we needed it out here because it needs to be a global variable within this massive function in it, okay? We're gonna need to access this from a lot of other places. So it exists out here, and now we're gonna reference it, and this is where we're gonna start manipulating it. And we're going to say that it's equal to the results. If you remember, if we look at these sample questions that come back as a response, the JSON that comes back has 2 keys. The second one is results. That has the objects of the questions. That's what we want. So we're going to set our questions array equal to JSON.results. And that way it has just those objects. And then I'm going to put something in here so we can track when the questions are actually received. This goes to showing how the promises work. Okay, and then we will call display questions in a second because we're going to write another function. But for now, we need to just make sure that the fetch is working properly. So let's go over here. I'm going to refresh that, and then let's give it a try. Let's say we want music questions. Let's just look for 4 of them and multiple choice, and I don't care about the difficulty. Okay, go. Now, there's nothing here because we haven't created this part yet. And it says the categories are loaded, but I do not see, oh, have I not called it? I haven't called it. I have to call it, guys. Otherwise, you know, It doesn't do any good. Okay, so let me think about this. Yes. What am I missing? I pushed this button, but nothing happened. Why is that?
Was there any code behind the button?
Right. There's no listener, right? So it does not know that I pushed the button. So I can write some of these things that I'm going to need for that, but if I don't actually have the listener in place, we can't test it. So I'm going to skip down here to this one so that we can go ahead and do that. And that way we'll be able to at least see if it's picking up the questions from the API and bringing them back, okay? So let's skip down. And this is going to be a form level listener. So this is what I was talking about earlier. We could just do the button, but let's do it on the form level. We're gonna, because that way, instead of doing like button with the click action, we're just gonna use form with the submit action. And we're gonna do a, sorry, give me a second. Anonymous function. There you go. And our function is going to be, let's see. Eventually, we're going to need to validate the sucker, but we're going to skip that for right now. Right now, we just need to see if we can get those questions, right? So we'll try it. And we're going to add a couple other things there too later, but this is what we need right now. We just need a listener to pay attention for that submission and tell it to go get those questions. So I'm going to do that. Did y'all see that? Did you see how long it took? I don't know if you noticed that. Sometimes it takes a second. It's interesting. Okay. And true and false and books. And let's get 4 questions, sure. We're not going to see them, so it doesn't really matter. Okay. Did it happen? I do not actually see it happening. Why not? Dun, 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 dun. I wonder if my URL is not quite right. At type difficulty. Okay, I'm going to do something. I'm going to go see what we can see in the console here. And let's see what it's turning up with this. Oh, okay. I know what's happening. So you're going to need to deal with this with assignment 5. And they tell you that you need to use prevent default to keep the page from reloading after you submit, because typically when you submit something, it reloads automatically. The browser just does that. So what's happening is it's doing it so fast that it's reloading the page. So it's not even registering what we had done. So let's go back to that listener. And after this, we're going to add event and prevent default. All right, let's try it again. Okay, pick category, a couple questions, and let's go. There we go. All right, so it did go through. We just couldn't see it because it was refreshing the page. So there's our URL that was created. You can see that it added the token, and which is very long, so it's got some dots there, the amount and the category, just like we put in. And then it did actually say that the questions were received. So if I wanted to see what those were, we could actually test that too. Let's go up to the get questions and actually have it display the question object for us so we can see. The questions array, I should say. Okay, we'll just go with 4 questions. Okay, so new questions received. It says there's 4 of them. If we expand on this, you can see that here's the index of each one, and there's the object that actually, yeah. So these just came back from an API on the other side of the internet, and we called it all the way from over there. So this is good. We are headed in the right direction. We are getting the data that we need to work with. So next will be about actually getting it out on this page in the way that we need it to be. Yeah, good deal. Okay, and I'm going to delete that because otherwise we'll have a billion console.log statements that we don't actually need. Oh, let's see. So we don't need that yet. What do we need? A function to display the questions. I think that is definitely next. Let's do this one. Okay. So if we have our whole questions array, now we're going to need to loop over it.
Okay.
Right? And so we'll set up this function. Hello, display questions. That's what I said I would call it. And we're going to set up a loop over the questions, just like we did before with the categories. And bear with me for a moment while I type very badly, apparently. All right. Well, go get the current length of the questions and then we'll know how many times to go around. Okay. Now we already have established this question area. You'll notice we haven't used it yet. It's kind of dark. We're going to use it now because this is where we were talking about how we need the inner HTML for this entire section. So we're going to refer to this and say that we're going to add to the inner HTML, and we're going to add a whole bunch of more HTML to it. Just like we did before with adding HTML to get that drop-down list. So we'll start by, find where I was, there we go. Saying that question area is going to be added to, and again, we'll use a template literal so that we can very easily throw our placeholder variables in. And I am going to copy and paste this to save time because I wrote it already.
Carrie,
Yes.
I just wanted to get a quick question about the question area. Would it need inner HTML, or is it already set? Oh, okay.
It does. Thank you. Good catch. See, I love it when you guys catch mistakes. Saves a lot of fuss. Okay. Absolutely. I'm glad you're paying attention. That's correct. We are adding not to the question area object, the tag, we are adding to its inner HTML. That's right. Which right now is just a big empty string. So when we get to index 0, we're going to be adding to it the first time, and we will add what represents one question. So I've called that Q container here, and I have that backed up in my CSS. I've got all of these things already set for how they're going to look. So now we just need to have what they're going to say. So we have our container, and that gives us the ability to structure this kind of as one big thing. And this one is the number. It's going to say question number. Now our index, this loop is 0 based, just like most things, right? But it's actually question 1, not question 0, for the purposes of the user. So I've just put I+1, just so it reads out question 1. Otherwise, we're always going to be referring to 0. And we want to give this thing its own unique ID. Because we're looping through, we can do that, give these things unique IDs by taking advantage of our index. So I'm going to call this one score I, and basically the first one would be score 0, score 1, so on, right? And then I can use those later to refer very specifically to these things if I need to. And that's that's going to represent the score. That's basically going to be whether we tell them if their answer was correct or not. Okay. This is where we actually display the question itself. This is purely, actually just putting this out for display. It's just the question. We're going and getting the question at index I, and we're accessing its question property, this property right here of the question object, okay? And we'll skip this for a second. All of our answers are going to go there, but I've got that as a variable, and I'll show you why in a second. The last part is I put a little thing down at the bottom that just kind of spits out, this is what category it was, and this is what difficulty it was, just because I think that's interesting. And this is a little bit of fancy HTML, actually it's not HTML, but they're fancy characters. I've got a little bullet point right there and a little bit of extra space around it. That's what that means. That's a non-breaking space, is what NBSB stands for. Okay, so that's just a formatting thing, but I've got these, different properties pulled out of the question object, and I've got it all set up to display the way I want. Now, the answers part, this is where it gets tricky, because if I want to make this page interactive, where I'm not just displaying the questions and the possible answers, but giving the user a chance to answer it, then I have to write a little bit more HTML, and then we get into radio buttons. And I want to emphasize, yet again, this is outside the scope of assignment 5, but it was too cool to pass up, so we're going to do it anyway. Okay, so this brings us back up to this function right here. I realized that the best, most efficient way to do this, if you have more than one option, is to loop, right? Just like we did when we looped through to get these categories for this dropdown. So we're actually going to go figure that out separately, and then we'll just plug it in right here with a single variable so that it puts however many options, it puts all of those option tags in place. But right now we're in the middle of a template literal, so trying to loop through and establish that here is not really going to work. So we're going to go do it separately, and we will call that actually let answers, and then I'm going to say answers is equal to what did I call this thing? Get answer options, and this is the function that we are about to write. And so we'll write this function that will return those option tags to us, and it'll plunk it down right here in the middle. So let's go up and do that. And let's see if there's anything else I needed for this. Nope. We're done with this one. And function, get answer options. Okay. The thing about the answer options is we can't really run this function by itself without knowing which question we're talking about, right? So we probably ought to pass something in. So I'm going to say we need to pass the index in, because all we really need is the index, and that gets us straight to the question because we have them in a questions array that exists outside of all these functions, right? So let's just say that that's going to be the question index that we're going to pass in that way. And I'm doing that on purpose because we're also going to have a answer index. So we've got our question index. Now we need to go get all of the possible options. So I'm gonna cut and paste this. This is a long one. I just don't want to screw up the syntax and get stuck on it. Okay. So let's look at what's going on here. We're going and we're getting the question, and at its index, getting the specific question that we're interested in. And we're going to go get the correct answer. That's another one of those properties that comes with the JSON from the API. And that correct answer, I'm going to go ahead and just put it in an array. You see that? And then I'm going to join it together using the function concat with the array that already exists for incorrect answers. Now, that sounds confusing, so let's go look at it. Let's go back to this sample data that we pulled from the API. You can see right here that correct answer is just a string, right? but the incorrect answers are in an array. So they're already in an array. What we want is an array that holds all 4 of those. Okay. So we're going to actually go, and the way I did this in one line was to get the correct answer, put it inside an array as the only, thing that's in the array, and then join it together with the existing array of the 3 incorrect answers. So once we've done that, we have an array of all 4 answers. But, and this is important, if we're talking about, well, if we're talking about true and false, it's true too, but multiple choice in particular, it's going to always display the correct answer first right now, right? And that's probably not good from a user experience point of view. So let's use a handy dandy little helper function that I've got down here called shuffle. Okay, and this just does some stuff, and I'm not going to explain it right now. You can look at it later. And literally just shuffles the array. So, and you don't have to save it to a new array because it actually messes with the array itself. So when it gets done with this, the array is now officially shuffled. Okay. Now we have the answers in a random order. So the only thing left to do is to build the string that contains those option tags that we need for the HTML. And that's what we want to return to the other function. So let's do that. And I'm going to copy and paste this because I don't want this to take forever. We still have a little bit to do. Okay. So let's go through this. We've got a loop. This I remember represents the index of the answers. Okay. Q index is what we're using to represent the index of the question inside the question array. So we're going through these 4 answers in this case. If it's multiple choice, it'll be 4. If it's true and false, it'll be 2. But for each one, we're going to, oh, and I forgot, I left out a line. This is an important line. We have to establish that empty string that we're starting. Sorry, there we go. So we have an empty string that represents our options, and we're going to add an input and a label to each one that is a radio button. And so that actually looks a little bit different than it does for, I know I keep saying option, but because it is an option, but it's not an option tag. Does that make sense? The option tags are used for drop-down lists, select an option. For radio buttons, you use input, but you just say that it's a type radio. So sorry if that's confusing. So I've got a little bit of fancy stuff going on here. I mentioned this before about giving things unique IDs. You want everything on the page to have unique IDs. So if you're going to be looping through and doing a whole bunch of things at once, you can just take advantage of those index. So basically what I've done is say, ID, Q00 is question 0 and it's answer 0. Does that make sense? So everything will have relatively a different ID number because it's based on the question index combined with the answer index. And then we, same thing here. They all have to have the same name when they're radio buttons. So I'm naming them based on the question index so that all 4 of them or all 2 of them will have the exact same name. But then I use the question index here for our existing loop, the answer index when I need to make it very specific to this particular answer. So I've got the value set, and this, I messed with this. This ended up being the most straightforward way to do it, was to actually give the input value the exact same string as the question itself. No, I'm sorry, as the answer itself. So this is actually what's displayed. Normally you wouldn't do that. You'd come up with something shorter that's more representative. But in this case, it's going to be important when it comes to scoring. So this actually is literally what's displayed out here on the label. It's the same thing. Okay. So all of that, yes.
Can you please explain this indexing just one more time? Like, I sort of get it, but like, just so it will sink in.
Yeah, and again, I'll emphasize, don't freak out if you're a little bit lost on this, because this is more advanced and you don't have to mess with any of this. but for the sake of getting this page working well, it's worth going over in my estimation. Okay, so we have our question index that we passed in. We're only working with one question for this entire function because we're calling it right here when we're on a specific question already, right? So we use that index whenever we're talking about the specific question we want to reference. And then we have a new loop that uses our standard I for the loop we're in. And that is the reference to the one of the possible answers that is in that answers array that we just pulled together from the correct and incorrect answers and shuffled. So we'll one at a time, we're going to add them, and then we'll identify each of these input tags and label tags uniquely by taking advantage of the fact that we have these index numbers, so that the first one gets 0, and this gets, or like let's say it's question 13. This would be 13 and this would be 0, and then when we loop to the next one, this would still be 13, but this would be
1.
Exactly. So it just makes sure, and with the name, that's particularly important. It makes sure that all of them have the same question reference, but then they each have their own unique answer reference.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Yeah, yeah. I know it's a little bit to wrap your head around, and I learned a lot about this on my capstone project that I did, actually, which you guys will do for Unit 3. We did some pretty complex stuff on this web application that we made, and I learned a ton about using indexes and making this kind of like unique to loop through for HTML. It's pretty interesting stuff. Okay, so
Thank you, Carrie.
Yeah, you're welcome. So so now we have this template literal, and it's being added to this options thing. And when we get completely done with that, we're going to return what we now have, all of the text that's needed, or string, I should say, the entire string needed for options. So now we store that over here in answers, and we have that right here. So basically, you can pretend, if this is a multiple choice question, you can pretend there's 4 of these sitting right here. Does that make sense? Because we just went and we used this function up here to get these answers. And so we're taking that entire, thing that we pulled together here, looping through, and now we're going to put it right there. So that will bring everything full circle. Now, I think we should run this so that you guys can actually see it in action. We make sure, yeah, I don't think there's anything, well, we'll find out. Okay, I think everything's cool. Yeah, okay. Got our categories. Let's go to television. True or false? Easy. And let's choose 5 of them. All right. Are they displaying? Are they not displaying? They're not displaying. Where are they not displaying? All right. Let's see. Dun, dun, dun. All right, let me think about this for a second.
Is display questions being called? I was gonna ask.
You're
And
excellent
then,
question. Yeah, because it's still kind of grayed out a little bit. You see that? Yes. Okay. So the question is, where did I decide I wanted? Oh yeah, get questions. Right here. I said call display questions, and then we didn't go back and do it. Okay. So this is where we do it. Excellent. See, you guys are tracking. All right. And then I'm going to put a console log statement so that we can actually see when those show up in terms of relative to all of the promises being fulfilled. I mean, okay. Let's try that again. All right. Good questions. What did we say we're doing? True or false, easy. All right, let's go. Okay. Shuffle array is not defined at answer options. Okay, so we need to go to line 111. Oh, I didn't name it the same. My bad. It's just shuffle. All right, that was easy fix. Might not be the last thing, but this is what we have the console for. Okay, let's just go. Look at that. All right, so we've got ourselves some questions. And the first one, Star Trek. I love it. Okay.
Wow.
Tiberius would be the correct
Yeah.
answer for that one. I know that. Have no idea about Teletubbies. I hated them with a burning, my top burning passion. Okay. So let's see. We've got our questions. You can see our radio buttons have each of those unique answers that we created when we went over here and made each of these inputs. And then it's got, that last little bit with our extra info, just because, we like to be that way, apparently. And so the only thing missing is to tell the user whether they got it right or not, right? But there's a couple of things we have to think about. Like, sorry, somebody gonna say something? No,
I just said this is so cool. I mean, it's so rewarding to see all the questions.
I know. That's the thing. It's like you do a lot of coding and you can test things up to a certain point, but it's when you actually see it hit the page that it's like, yay. I totally
Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's good. Yeah, and just thinking about this in terms of the functionality of the page. Yeah, okay, so we're going to go and we're going to address that. We're going to make sure they know whether they got it right or not. But we also need to keep in check this idea that, like, what if I went and I wanted to have new questions? Like, let's say I go in here and I say I want, a whole new set of things, and I hit go, nothing happens, right? And it's because I still have my original question array. It still has all the questions it had in it before. We haven't left the page because we made sure that we had that prevent default in there so it doesn't refresh. So we need to answer to that. So I've got a to-do here, and I'm going to take stop it. I'm going to take the to-dos off of the ones that we've actually completed. Okay. I've got a function here to reset the question area, because we basically just need to make sure that that questions array gets put back to nothing. And so we'll just call it function clear questions. And it's pretty straightforward. We're going to take question area, that entire big blank white space that we had before, that whole section in our document, and set it back to an empty string. I mean, that's it. That's the display on the page. So that takes care of the display side. You always have to think in terms of the display side, and then you also have to think in terms of your actual data structures that you have. So we also need to set the questions array back to empty, right? Because there's two different ways that that information was being stored. So now we have everything we need that should take care of that, and we just need to call this in the right place. So we're going to come down here to our event listener. So when that button's hit, before we get questions, we also clear the previous questions. Yeah, there we go. Okay, let's try that. All right, so we'll get 3 questions, random questions, and now let's go and get 5 questions from the film category. There we go. So now we actually have it replacing the data. And let's see, I think there's 2 things that's done. One, we said we were gonna score the question, and we'll keep that real simple. And that's gonna be relevant. So there's parts of this will be relevant to your assignment. And then also we're going to do some validation here, and that's also relevant to your assignment. So we're finally back to being relevant to the assignment, which is, I know, important to all of you. Okay, so let's see. Let's get the, what do we want to do first? Let's get the validation taken care of. Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so if we want to make sure that the number of questions the user puts in is valid, there is actually some built-in stuff with HTML that allows you to do it that we can use, and I will demonstrate it for you temporarily. But sorry, I'm trying to like scroll over, and it's because I got the thing off the page. Okay. Like we could go in here and actually say we want the minimum to be 1, and we want the max to be 50. And we could also set a value so that it defaults to 10 instead of being blank. Okay, so watch this. Now you see it says 10. And you'll notice that if I scroll down to 1, it won't let me actually go any lower than 1. And if I come up here and try to go, past 50, it won't let me go any further. If I were to actually try to type this in to cheat the system and tab over and hit go, the browser actually has its own built-in validation that tells me the value must be. So, and actually, that would work. Yeah. So that's the way the browser handles it through the HTML. But for your assignment, you actually need to handle it through the DOM. So, oops, these are the ones I want to delete. Okay. So we're going to take that out of there, and we're actually going to go over and handle it with the DOM. So let's see. We have to make sure that the value that they've put into the num questions input is not greater than 50. And so we're also going to check for the value being less than 1. So if either of those things are true, then we need to have an alert. And I'm going to cut and paste it for the sake of time. And I've also got a little console log there just to note something for us. Oops, didn't have it. So, and this, tells them it's supposed to keep it to 1 to 50, right? And then we would say else and put, these up in here every time. Okay. But there's one more thing. We have this event prevent default down here that keeps it from refreshing the page. If it does submit, if it gets to the point of being able to do all this to do what we need it to do. But we also want one that prevents it if it doesn't get that far. So we should put one that's specific to the test itself. Now, for your assignment, you're actually going to have to do multiple tests, and you're going to need to have ways to track that. One way that we could do it actually is, let's see, alternate way to do it. We could say that we have some sort of variable, that's, sorry, let valid equal true, or something. And then, you could have some more code. You could test several things, and then you could, at the end, make sure that this stuff right here doesn't get done unless, valid is true for this, valid numbers, valid whatever, valid that. You can actually make it a little bit more complicated. I'm sorry, that's probably clear as mud right now. But my point is, for this, we are only validating one thing. But when you need to validate multiple things, it won't be as simple as this, because you won't be able to do any of this until you've done multiple validations and you have a way to actually clarify that those things are all either true or false, or however you want to do it. sorry, I know I probably just confused you. Sorry about that. Do you sort of know what I mean? Maybe. Yeah, okay. Yeah, with more time, I probably could have come up with like additional, I mean, I guess I could very quickly do, like, what if we decided we wanted to require that, what if we said we wanted to require that the category had to be present, that we're not going to allow any. Then if we decided that was actually a restriction, we could do the same thing, and we could, you know, have some sort of thing, or enter a category at all, actually. Okay. Please select a category. Okay, so we have an alert for that now. It also prevents default based on that one condition. But this stuff right here, we actually want to come down here. And so what we're going to do instead is say, all right, let valid number and valid category. Okay, we're just going to declare a couple variables there. Actually, yeah. Okay. And then we'll say that if the number of questions was not valid, we're going to say that valid number is false. Otherwise, actually, instead of doing the else, the cleaner way to do it would be to just initialize them to true. So let's just do it that way. Changing my mind as a code, guys, sorry. All right, same thing here. Then valid category is equal to false. So then down here, we'd say, okay, we want to make sure that both of those things have to be true in order to actually clear the questions and get new ones, right? So we're going to just basically, they're Boolean, so all we have to say is if valid number and valid category. Yeah. And if those things are true at this point, because it passed both of these tests, then it should allow that. So let's give that a try. All right, so we've got our categories, got our questions. I'm gonna choose numbers of questions, but not a category. And it did not put up an alert. What? Oh, value. Every time you have to actually check the value, right? Not the element. Okay. All right. There we go. Oops, please select a category. And it doesn't let it go through. Likewise, if I, have for some reason a negative number because my kittens came and got on my keyboard is usually the best explanation for that. But I do have a category. I'll get, this one. What if I was to leave this blank and have a non-valid number? I get the number one, and then I get the category one, and then it, so they're working. And that's kind of a good way to handle it. You handle them each individually, but then before you move on, you make sure that all of them passed. Does that make sense? Okay. I think it was good to take time to do that because it's going to be relevant. Okay. So if we want to, okay, so I've written a little bit of code already up in here to have this score be present. It's empty not only because there's nothing between here, but also because even if there was, like I could put score goes here. Let's just do that. Score goes here. And let's see what happens. All right. Let me go get some questions. Oh, I forgot that I banned it from doing, okay. There we go. All right. Now I click on one of these, well, nothing's gonna happen with that yet. Anyway, there's nothing here, right? The text should be here and it's not. That's because over in my CSS, where you find the score class, there's this property called visibility, and I've got it hidden, okay? So I don't actually want that to show up until under specific circumstances. So this is where this whole last listener is going to come into play. We need a listener that's going to let us score this question. I'm going to copy and paste it because we're getting long on time. Now, I said document level. A lot of the things that you guys have been doing have been, you would put a listener, directly onto one of the specific objects, right? Like I want to check this button, or I want to, this particular element here or there. In this case, we have multiple elements that are the same kind, but we can't identify them by ID because they all have unique IDs. We made sure of that, right? And they need to. But we want the same behavior no matter which one of them on this page there is, of all these answers. So we want a click event that works for the entire document, but it will only trigger it if it matches that particular class. And that is why up here, you'll notice that when I set these answers in, I made sure that they had the class answer. That's how we tell, because every single one of them has the same class, but they're the only things that do. So we make sure that if anything that has this class, any one of these inputs that you see here gets clicked on, we're going to tell it what to do. So that's what this if right here says. If we go and we get the general event that this refers to for the document, if that target, the thing that we clicked on, because we said click, matches answer, dot answer. Oh, by the way, yeah, with matches, it is really, really important that you actually have the dot before the answer. That is the CSS way of referring to a class, because it will not work without it. Trust me, I've done some little side projects in the last few days, and every single time I forgot about it, I'd be sitting there going, why isn't it working? And then I would realize, oh, I forgot the period, So yeah, make sure that's there if you do this matches thing. Okay, we're going to go and make sure we've got the index so we know which question it was. And the way we can do that is the target itself that we clicked on, that's one of these. Remember, we created unique IDs for those, and we embedded the question index in those IDs. Do you guys remember that? Up here. We actually made sure that the ID for each individual possible answer, those radio buttons, has the question index built into it. So that's going to be a really easy way for us now. If that's what our target is based off of, we can figure out what question we need to go check the answer against just by going and looking that up. And so that happens to be at index 1 of that ID number. Because it started with a Q, and then the very next character is the question ID. And I just realized that this is problematic, because what happens when questions have more than one digit? When you get after 9 questions? Interesting. Okay. Well, we're going to leave it for a second and keep moving on so I can explain what's going on here. Oh yeah, we don't need this. Ignore that. Okay, forgot to remove it. It was one of the many methods I tried to do this earlier. Our score, we are just now going and establishing that connection to that particular element. There's no point in doing it up here because these are for things that only exist once on the page. But up here, you know, or down here, depending on how you look at it, we are referring to something very specific, to a specific question, right? So we want to make sure that it's the score that is at that particular question index. And there again, we named the score that way. We gave the score a unique identifier by giving it the index of the question when we were setting this up in the first place. So all of this stuff ties in together. And again, your assignment's not going to be this detailed, but I just want you to understand it since we've come this far, that you'll still understand how it all relates together, okay? So then we go and we make that score visible. And then we just basically say, if the value matches the correct answer for the index for that question, then we're going to make it green and say, you know, it's correct, yay. And if it's not, then we'll make it red and say, nope, try again, okay? So let's make sure, I think I've got everything in place for this. So let's run it and see what happens. I keep forgetting I still have that there, okay. Yeah, okay. What's the orange and white bot's name in Star Wars: The Force Awakens? Oh, it's BB-8, right? Correct. What is the oldest Disney film? Pretty sure it's Snow White, but I could be wrong. Might be Fantasia. Oh, it is Snow White. Yay. Who's the antagonist in the Lorax? Oh boy. You know what? I think I came across this question once before when I was testing. I think it's this one, but I have noticed that it messes up when it has characters in it sometimes. And that was the whole thing that encoding was supposed to prevent. But for some reason, it's not working because I think, yeah, if I click on all of these, they all say that it's not right, but it must be that one because it's got that thing. And that's something that I don't know what to do about, or maybe it's this one, I don't know, because of the hyphen. But I've seen the Lorax like once, sort of, kind of, so sorry. Anyway, but you can see that we have different, you know, things there, and something that you don't really have to worry about making them the visibility hidden again, because these were temporary objects, right? As soon as we go and clear the questions from the page and get a whole new set of questions, they're going to get created based on the class, and they'll all be set to be, you know, invisible again, they'll be hidden. So you can pretty much just make them visible when you need them to be and then not worry about it after that. Okay, so we've got that part done. And the only thing that I need to address, I'm gonna put a fix me in here. Multiple digit question ID number. Okay, I will go back and I will mess with that and get I'll probably use like a, you know, a slice or something, find a way, because it's up to a hyphen. Yeah, so you could just use string methods just to get it where it goes from, you know, index 1 through, yeah. But it's gotten late, and I know you guys probably want to go, so I'll fix that before I put it in the code and push it up to the repo. So the final code will have it right in the solution, okay? And I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, I mean, I would prefer, just from a user experience point of view, you know, not to restrict this, but and also probably would just, you know, use better so that it doesn't even let you go back down to the negatives in the first place. But the type of validation that you guys need to be able to demonstrate for assignment 5 requires that you do things at the DOM level, and that you have to deal with issues like something, you know, being out of range or not being a number at all, for example, which isn't an issue here, but could be for some of your input. So I think that's it. You guys got questions?
For me, it's still mainly that line that you had the Q index. Kind of just not sure how it worked in that last the click handler. event
Oh, yeah,
target.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you mean how I used it or how I got it?
Well, I guess the reason to use one. I guess I'm confused with the
Oh, that,
ID one. Yeah, I was just confused if it's like iterating or not iterating, but looping or
that's just me using bracket notation on a string.
okay.
So remember that event.target represents the answer you're clicking on, the radio button, right?
Okay.
So we want to go look at the ID of the radio button. Well, we set those up here. Every single radio button that we created this ID number, and it's pieced together with Q, the index of the question, a hyphen, and then the index of the answer for that question. 0 through 4 or 0 through 2 or 0 through 1, I guess, if it was true and false. So that we're just basically going and looking for everything because Q is index 0. So this would be index 1, but as soon as you get into double digits or further, well, it wouldn't be more than double if you only can go up to 50. But anyway, so I need to be able to actually go and say that it goes from index 1 up until the index of that hyphen. I just need to change it so that it actually accounts for the fact that it might be 2 digits and not 1. But I'm borrowing, that's the quickest way for me to go find out what question that answer belongs to, because I embedded it right here. And that enables me to go and actually look up the correct answer for that question in the questions array. Because it would be really convoluted otherwise for me to try to figure out what question I'm looking at. So that was why I did that, was to give me a path back to identify the question that goes along with an answer, rather than vice versa. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions? I know this was a lot, guys. I know it was.
So I was wondering what happens if you have your validations in there, like, you know, let's say you had to have all the fields with a value in them. But what if you have all the fields with a value in them and you still get an alert message? Like what would you be missing? Because that's, I don't know if I'm allowed to ask that, because that's something that's coming up in my code.
I mean, whether or not an alert message comes up is 100% up to how you write your code.
Okay.
So you'll just need to figure out why something is still alerting. You might want to check your conditional logic. There might be something that you're allowing for that you haven't thought of. Because like right here, for example, I accounted for the range, you know, it has to be a number that's between 1 and 50. But what if this was like a regular field instead of a number field, and I put in, you know, G, it won't let me. But if this was a text field and I put in G, well, that's not a number. So I would have to actually validate for the fact that something is a number or not, you know, is it even a number in the first place?
Right, yeah.
So sometimes there can be other things that are causing it to alert because you haven't accounted for all the possibilities that you need to catch it for, or you may not have accounted for, what am I trying to say? You may have accounted for more than you meant to, depending on how you wrote these Boolean expressions.
Okay, yeah, actually that makes sense, yeah.
Yeah. So you just have to kind of narrow it down, and you always want to test these things with, you know, what they call edge cases. Think of the extremes, you know. That's why I went down into negative numbers, even though it's stupid. Like, why would you ever ask for a negative number of questions? But I wanted to test it just to see what would happen. Like, how does my code handle that? And it does, you know, because I made sure to handle it right here.
Okay, yeah, I'll keep going over what I've got in my test questions.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Comments?
Gary, you just really have a talent for breaking this down in a way that's really easily understandable, and I really appreciate the time and effort that you put into this for us. I'm so grateful.
Thank you. I'm glad it's helpful. That's the goal. I really, you know, the more exposure you guys have to all of this, the better. It's just, you know, you'll get better and better at this stuff the more you go along, and it helps having more examples to look at in other situations, and it helps you, I think, be more flexible in your thinking too, because it's important not just to know how to do something in the mechanical sense, like I know how to write that statement, but you have to know how to think about it. You have to know how to come up with the logic in the first place. So it's good to have different types of problems that kind of stretch your thinking in those regards. And I just noticed that there's chat here. Yeah, sorry about that, guys. I am terrible. I don't notice the chat when I'm presenting. Sorry about that. Okay, well, if there aren't any more questions, I'm going to stop recording, and if I can figure it out. There we go.